Okay, metric accents. What that means is that now that we have two notes against this one, these two are not equally as important. One is more important than the other. So the weight of the melody gets put on the downbeat. The downbeat is the more important of the two notes in any given bar. The second note on the upbeat is sometimes called the diminution. So this is something we have to consider when we're writing, because we need to make sure that consonant intervals happen on downbeats. And if we're going to have a dissonant interval, which we can have a lot more of, and I'll talk about that in just a second, they happen on the offbeat, or the second half of the measure, or the diminution, whatever term you want to use. Let's call it an offbeat. Let's stick with that because that's kind of more of what it is. So because of that, the second note against the cantus firmus, the offbeat, can have a number of new intervals now. It can actually be a second. Seconds were not allowed in first species counterpoint at all. We can do a second. We can do a fourth. We can do an augmented fourth. We can do a diminished fifth. We can do a seventh. And we can do a ninth. All of those intervals are now allowed as long as they are in the unstressed part of the counterpoint, which is another way of saying they are on the offbeat. You cannot have any of those intervals on the downbeat. Imagine it kind of works like let's do this. What if I got rid of these notes, the offbeat, and we said this is, pretend these are all whole notes, and we are exactly following the rules of first species counterpoint. The new rules that we're talking about and these new intervals only apply to the new note, which is the second half of the measure. So we can have the second here, and remember the second interval, what we're talking about is between the cantus firmus. We always have to count the cantus firmus as still going. This B flat is still happening through this whole measure. This D is happening through this whole measure. So in this measure, for example, we have to say this D to B relationship, we have to think of that as a sixth, because it is. And then we have to think of this F not as a lone wolf. It has a note that it's being set against, and it's this D still, because the D is still sounding. So we have to take into account that as a third also. So we have a sixth to a third. That's okay. We like both those intervals, and those are both consonant intervals. You don't have to have a dissonant interval on the second half of the beat. You can have two consonant intervals. You're almost always going to have to do it with a leap, though, right? Because if you have two consonant intervals, there's no way to do that without a leap. If you're doing a scale going down now that we're doing two notes to one, a scale going down isn't going to work. You're going to run out of notes, and you're going to have to do dissonant passing tones. And that's okay. That's why it's allowed. But doing a leap to get two consonant tones is also allowed. If we go here, we have a C to an E, so we have a third. It's also allowed. We came from another third here, so I have two thirds in a row, but that's okay. And now we're going down to a second, C to D, and that's allowed because it's on the second half of the measure. And that is going to go down and resolve to actually a fifth, which is okay by itself as long as we don't create a parallel. And the next note takes us down to a third. So another skip here to get us down to another consonant interval. So that's how the metric accent works. We have new intervals that we can use, but we can only use them on the second half of the measure, the unaccented part of the measure, which is another way of saying the offbeat.